Now, if you've been on this channel for the past 2 years, you'll know that I'm a pretty big fan of the Far Cry series. So when I saw the trailers and promotional footage for Far Cry 6, I got pretty damn excited. You got Giancarlo up there as the bad guy, you got an entirely new map, and from the looks of things, entirely new weapons. Now, you know me, this isn't going to be me just shitting out expectations for Far Cry 6, no. I want to know what the weapon balancing is going to be like in Far Cry 6. And in order to figure that out, we gotta look through all of Far Cry's history all the way up to Far Cry 5 to see the direction the weapon balancing has been going and seeing if Far Cry 6 is going to have weapon balancing that either makes or breaks its gameplay. So without further ado, I'm Pliskin, and today we're going to dive right on into what to expect from Far Cry 6's weapon balancing systems. Before we talk about Far Cry specifically, we need to understand my own biases and preferences when it comes to weapon balancing. I feel the pinnacle of weapon balancing can be found in games like Halo CE, where the less wasted space, the better. What do I mean by that? Essentially, I mean that when there's one gun for one purpose, it makes a more, at least I think, wholesome and fun gameplay experience, as you have to try to learn the game's weapon balancing systems. You need to learn what weapon does what and use those combinations of weapons to get around certain difficult scenarios. Whereas in a game like Call of Duty, you could just set one gun for 10 different roles and go through the entire game that way. So, essentially, I like it when everything has a purpose. I don't like it when there's guns there that are redundant. And again, I'm just using this time to gush over CE. But enough of that, let's move on to Far Cry. Back in the days when Far Cry was still trying to figure out its identity, you had a lot of interesting weapons that the game experimented with. You had completely suppressed dart guns that would kill any enemy on one shot. You had weapons that should have done a lot of damage but really didn't. For example, the G3 and FAL are both weak as piss and do the exact same thing. In fact, even the AK featured in the game does the exact same thing. A lot of the SMGs aren't really that unique. You have the Mac 11 and the Uzi. The Uzi is obviously the better choice in that game, but they're not really all that different. It's just redundant. You see redundancies everywhere, making Far Cry 2 one of those experiences where there's only really 5 guns, maybe 7 worth using, and as soon as you can, you gravitate towards those guns. The only reason you'd use something else besides the best guns in the game would be because you don't have access to the best guns in the game. If you want to see more about what I think are the best weapons in Far Cry 2, what's worth your time to use, and why it's not one of those games where you can just kind of pick up anything and it's all equally viable, check out my top 5 list on the guns of Far Cry 2. Now, Far Cry 3 did so much more than just nail what is now the series' signature formula, but it also revolutionized games as a whole with its balancing of open-world systems. And of course, the weapons changed from Far Cry 2 in order to work in tandem with said open-world systems. For example, you have weapons in Far Cry 3 that are really good for going up against outposts. You have weapons that are very good for traversing through the wild. For example, shotguns in Far Cry 3 have a great purpose, as when you're walking around and a bear attacks you or a tiger attacks you, you can whip a shotgun out and take care of it with ease. Now, if you try to sneak around an outpost, a shotgun isn't going to be as useful as, say, a suppressed SMG, sniper, or assault rifle. The featuring of the new weapon customization system, in which you can choose optics, suppressors, or extended mag on your weapons with limited slots that you can fill with upgrades, meant that players could now take certain weapons and optimize them for a certain role. For example, my favorite thing to do is to optimize the FAMAS for stealth, and then optimize an LMG for just everything, balls to the walls, violence, craziness. And because Far Cry 3 allows me to do that, I can experiment with these weapons further in different scenarios that I wouldn't normally put them through. However, like Far Cry 2, Far Cry 3 suffers from the whole, there's good weapons in the game and there are weapons there that are just there to be bad. and the only reason you wouldn't use the best weapons immediately is because you haven't unlocked them or just don't have access to them yet. So there is wasted space and there is redundancy. However, this works for Far Cry 3 because those better weapons help aid with the sense of progression throughout the game. So you start with the weak shit, but then as you get the stronger shit, you've gone through missions, you've gone through the open world, you've gone through experiences, so those weapons feel earned. So it works. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of these type of systems, it works for what Far Cry 3 is going for. I won't talk too long about Far Cry 4, even though it's one of my favorite games in the series, if not of all time, simply because it does what Far Cry 3 does, except it adds in a couple new weapons and rebalances certain guns. It nerfs the FAMAS though, I'm not a fan of that, I will say that. So this brings us to Far Cry 5 and all of the changes it made to the weapon balancing system, and trust me, it made a lot of them. The first biggest change is the way the increased customization allowed by Far Cry 5 radically changes how you would progress with some weapons. Whereas in Far Cry 3 I might not use a sniper rifle because it doesn't have as good of a scope as one of the late game weapons, or use it because it doesn't really do that much damage, or because I can't suppress it. In Far Cry 5 you can suppress pretty much anything and put high level scopes on pretty much anything. Meaning I can use something like the bolt action 308 rifle featured in the game, which is weak as piss, and still make it work, simply because I can optimize it for really long range accurate headshots. So this helps to really minimize the wasted space that you saw in Far Cry 2, 3, and 4, because now, in theory at least, every gun has its use. Another change for the better is the way Far Cry 5 tackles damage in relation to Far Cry 3, 4, and 2. In those older games, damage was really dependent on the gun. However, in Far Cry 5, it's more so dependent on the round the gun is firing. So, when you go into the pistol category, it doesn't matter if you're using the Beretta or the P22-6. They both do the same amount of damage because they are both firing 9mm. This is great, especially for me as a gun buff, because I get really annoyed when I pick up two 5.56 rifles in a game, and they both do different varying amounts of damage. So to have damage make sense like this is definitely a step forward for the series. Another interesting way the gun balancing is changed up is that you have more realistic reloads now. Now, while Far Cry has always exhibited pretty decent manual of arms, there have been some guns in the series that really haven't made sense or have really neutered the gun simply because the reload is being done not necessarily improperly, but in a way that isn't as efficient as it could be. So I'm going to use the Spaz 12 here as an example, where during the reload, instead of just loading all of the shotgun shells into the magazine tube, you can actually make use of the fact that you can put a round right into the chamber, be ready to fire, so that if a guy comes around the corner, you can empty out a shot and not have to be like, shit, I still need to reload this shotgun. In most games, shotguns take forever to reload and forever to fire quickly from a reload, so the fact that a realistic feature is added like this means that it'll change up the balancing of a lot of the weapons, making weapons that were slower faster or faster slower. I talk more about how realistic reloads impacts weapon balancing in my Manual of Arms video. Now, while Far Cry 5 deviates from a lot of the structures set in Far Cry 3 and present in Far Cry 4, it does retain that basic Far Cry formula of the open world that you need to go through, explore, find quests, go into cave, and take out outposts. So the weapons, to an extent, are still balanced around that. Using something like the Spaz 12 is great for traversing the wilderness or direct combat. A scoped, suppressed rifle is great for breaking down an outpost. The grenade launcher is still great for anti-vehicular use, and pistols are still great to have as a quick sidearm to whip out or to use for closer range stealth. Now again, any weapon in Far Cry 5 can be customized however you wanted it, so unlike Far Cry 3, I could literally suppress the Spaz 12 and use that as my stealth weapon while going throughout an outpost. And vice versa, I could also take the sniper, not really suppress that, and put a really small red dot on it so I could use it for closer ranges if I wanted to. So the basic skeleton of Far Cry 3 and 4 is there, however the options you have with Far Cry 5 go through the roof. And this changes a lot, because it's not so much like Halo CE where one gun has one specific role, it's leaning more so towards the Call of Duty sort of mantra, where one gun can be optimized for many different roles. And while I don't necessarily have an issue with that at face value, there are some problems with that we're going to be talking about in a second. But before I start criticizing this game, let's talk about the weapons that have been most revolutionized by the introduction of a new enemy in Far Cry 5. Now, in older Far Cries, the mounted MGs were always weapons of opportunity. You could use them if they were there to mow down enemies quickly, but the majority of the time, since you're playing offensively in a Far Cry game, the MGs were more dangerous in the hands of an enemy than you. However, due to the introduction of the air enemies in Far Cry 5, that being helicopters or planes, these weapons now have a purpose as they are incredibly effective against airplanes, helicopters, and the such. While if I were to take on a mounted gun while clearing out an outpost of ground troops, I would be at a disadvantage because it would keep me stationary and go against Far Cry's whole "you move or you die" sort of mantra. However, with the plane type enemies, I'm better off hunkering down and just raining fire on them. As if I try to move around, they can very easily outflank me, outrun me, and most of the time outgun me. So this is a great example of how you can use an enemy to justify a weapon's existence and vice versa. Again, Halo CE is the master of this, but I need to give credit where credit is due, and the way Far Cry 5 reinvigorates mounted machine guns or turrets is spectacular. Really quick, before we move on to the negatives, one more positive. I love how this game subverts our expectations and has the AK/AKM as the last unlocked assault rifle of the game. What's usually just a throwaway or pretty decent but not really a master of anything sort of weapon you get right at the start, the AK is instead this masterclass of damage, range, stealth, everything that you unlock at the end. And I think games doing like this, going against our expectations and conventions, is amazing, because how many times do I need to see the suppressed FAMAS in the stealth role? How many times do I need to see the AK as a starter weapon? I get comfortable, and through that comfort, I don't have as much fun as I do when I don't know what to expect from the game's weapon sandbox. So, awesome. Now that we've gone over how Far Cry 5 made improvements to the overall weapon system, let's talk about the negative fat that we hope it'll trim off for Far Cry 6. The first issue I have with this game is the redundancy. As much as I love the pistol variety, the P226 and the Beretta act too much like the exact same gun. You could get rid of one of them and it wouldn't change the game at all. The same could be said about the AR-15 and the VHK assault rifle, I think it's called in this game. They both do the same amount of damage, and yeah, that's good because of the bullets. However, they don't feel different enough. You can have them do the same amount of damage, but then give the AR-15 a reload speed boost, or make the VHK have a higher fire rate so at closer ranges it's more viable. The weapons literally feel like the same thing with different animations, and that's definitely a weak point. I mean, if you want to see redundancy, this game literally justifies having 3 different SMG choices, all be 3 different variations of the MP5. You're telling me with all that customization, all you can do is give me 3 different MP5s and call it a day? That's just lazy. The same thing can be said for the AKs. The AK-47 and the AKM are literally the exact same gun in this game. They can take the same attachments, they have the same statistics. The only difference is literally the cosmetic changes that come with a more tactical look or a more traditional AK look. And that again is just lazy. Also, I know this game wants to deviate from Far Cry 3 and 4, but you break the sense of progression when right off the bat, you get a 50 BMG that's suppressible for free. Now, Far Cry 4 had a way where after you get through the tutorial, you can actually manage to get a 50 BMG early, but that's like a little known secret. I made a video about it, you can check that out. But in this game here, it just kind of hands you, right in the menu, a 50 BMG, breaking the game right from the start. What were the developers thinking with that? Also, there's a few issues with certain weapon damages. For example, the lever action assault rifle can be made to work as a better sniper than the actual bolt action 308 sniper that's there. And then last but not least, there are some goddamn bullet spongy enemies there that make no sense. I understand a Juggernaut taking multiple shots to kill, but some random dude with a rocket launcher, that just makes no sense to me. So, based on what we've seen from the older Far Cry games as well as Far Cry 5, what exactly can we expect from Far Cry 6? Or what should we hope for Far Cry 6? Well, the first thing that I think is safe to expect is further customization options. Maybe not to the extent of Warzone, but something like that. Far Cry 5 really took us in the direction of take whatever gun you want and make it whatever you want it to be, and I wouldn't be surprised if Far Cry 6 continues that. Something I hope to see is a little less redundancy. While I think it's cool to feature a lot of cool guns in your game, I feel like there's things that can be done to change them up. For example, if the Beretta had more range, or if they featured a Beretta and 40 Smith & Wesson to have different damage outputs to make it feel different from the P22-6, that would be better than just having two guns that look different but play the exact same. A better sense of progression, please, like Far Cry 6, don't just give us 50 BMG right from the start. Continuing to give us new weapons. For example, we know the FAL is already confirmed, so hopefully that replaces the M14, because I'm getting really tired of seeing the M14 as like the battle rifle in all these games. Like Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4 and now Far Cry 5 all feature the M14 as the be-all end-all like 308 semi-auto rifle. And hopefully we see more of the whole enemies and weapon balancing changes, like balancing weapons around enemies. More of that mounted gun beats airplane, airplane beats another strategy beats another guy, that sort of thing. Take more from what Far Cry 5 did a little bit there, include more of that Halo CE DNA, and that would be a hell of a lot of fun. But yeah guys, what do you think? Is there some part of Far Cry history I missed out on? Is there something you want to see in Far Cry 6 that you don't think we've seen in previous games? What are your predictions? What are your hopes for Far Cry 6? And do you have a favorite Far Cry out of the ones I mentioned? I'd like to know down in the comments below. Anyways guys, this has been Pliskin, over and out.